Hi, I'm Karima Brown. It's Sunday and it's time for The Fix. First up, we look at the violence and femicide that has engulfed South Africa. We speak to Deputy Police Minister and community members directly affected. Calls for Busisiwe Mkhwebane to be removed as the public protector is growing as several institutions question her fitness to hold office. Today we look at just how Parliament can go about axing her, if at all. And as the government bails out yet another bankrupt SOE, Mark Barnes, former head of the Post Office, tells us how SOEs can be run effectively. And as is custom, we take a look at what's made headline in the weekend newspapers and why. The Fix starts now. Welcome to this edition of The Fix, where every Sunday we hold decision makers to account. We tell you why it matters, how it affects you, and why you should care. Now, Busisiwe Mkhwebane, our current public protector, has divided the South African public in how she uses her office to conduct investigations into senior politicians, including President Cyril Ramaphosa. Compounding matters is the string of court rulings against her, in which several different courts have found her wanting on the facts, the law, her integrity and her honesty. Subsequently, Parliament's Rules Committee is drafting just how the National Assembly will go about removing her from office, as has been demanded by the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance and several NGOs. Joining me to discuss this process is my panel. I'm going to be joined by the Secretary of the National Assembly, Mr. Masibulele, Xaso, and then, of course, John Steenhuisen, who is the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance, as well as Mr. David Lewis from Corruption Watch. Mr. Steenhuisen, let me start with you as the official opposition. The draft rule, or rather the Rules Committee on Tuesday, had to begin working out and codifying how one goes about removing the head of a Chapter 9 institutions. Give me an update from the DA's perspective on how far you are with the process and if you're satisfied with it.
Well, Karima, we are satisfied so far with the process. What has happened is that the suggestions which we've put forward, the draft rules that we've formulated and have had tested with our advocates, have now been referred to the Rules Subcommittee in Parliament, which will convene this Friday, coming Friday, to start considering the process to flesh out the rules that will govern the removal processes for heads of Chapter 9 institutions, including the Office of the Public Protector. Obviously, we are urging that this process is concluded quickly, specifically given the gravity and the damage that Ms. Mkhwebane is doing to the integrity and credibility of the important office of the Public Protector in South Africa. You've mentioned a number of these shortfalls, but perhaps most damning, the findings of the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court, of her incompetence and dishonesty in her dealings on various reports. This is a very, very serious implication, but obviously we've got to make sure that the process is fair, open and transparent and unimpeachable going forward, given Mrs. Mkhwebane's litigious nature and her compulsion to spend vast amounts of public money on futile legal challenges. I think it's important that Parliament locks this process in and firewalls it from any frivolous or vexatious litigation from Ms. Mkhwebane herself.
Okay, let me bring Mr. Lewis in. Good morning, Mr. Lewis. Welcome to The Fix. Now, Corruption Watch has been one of the organizations that have obviously called for the public protector to be removed. Just outline for us why it's important that the current public protector is not fit to hold office, and more importantly, how confident are you that Parliament can actually work out the rules to do this in a way that is transparent, as Mr. Steenhuisen has said?
Well, you know, I really don't think, I guess contrary to what you said earlier, Karima, that the nation is divided over this question. I think the jury is completely in. I mean, a number of courts have found her incompetent, dishonest, as Mr. Steenhuisen has said. And the courts, several courts now have taken the really extraordinary step of imposing a personal costs order against her, which really is a sign of how outraged the courts are by her conduct. And, on top of incompetence and dishonesty, I have to say that she has created a perception of bias in her selection of targets, in her selection of issues. So she's certainly not competent to hold office. I think that Parliament will work out the rules. I don't think that's going to be a big problem. And I have every reason to believe, I think we all have, that the process will be transparent. At least the hearings will be conducted in the public. I mean, whether the committee then passes, which I think is by majority vote, a resolution to remove her from office, which then has to be submitted to the National Assembly, where it has to get a 2/3 vote, depends on, I think largely on how the ANC decide they want to handle this.
Mr. Lewis, given the fact that you're saying that it depends largely on the ANC in terms of the numbers, we all know the ANC is at war with itself, despite the constant suggestions that unity is being worked at. You actually literally see one ANC leader saying something different. Do you think that Mrs. Busisiwe Mkhwebane is hoping that a divided governing party, with the assistance of parties like the EFF, that she will survive the threshold of that 2/3 majority?
Look, I think she probably is. I mean, everything she does sort of smacks of the feeling that she has somewhere is confident of the political support that she has. I don't know whether the ANC would countenance, if they can prevent it, a division in its ranks over this thing. I mean, clearly, I think there must be a strong feeling from a large faction in the ANC who thinks that she could go. And if I were the faction who doesn't think that she should go, I'm not sure that I would be choosing such a sort of tainted standard bearer. She, as I say, her conduct has been sort of egregious. I mean, matching that of other famed, detractors like the previous head of the Hawks, Ntlhemeza, Menzi Simelane. I mean, frankly, much of their conduct pales by what she has done. And so I don't think that if I were inclined to support her, I'm not so sure that I would do so in the face of what it is that she is been found effectively guilty of: perjury, incompetence, and the like. So I don't know if the ANC would countenance a split on this, but who knows? I'm not privy to what their caucus decides and their inner workings are. But it would need them to vote in the committee for a resolution that would go to the National Assembly. And once it gets there, it obviously needs a 2/3 majority, so the ANC are critical there. But I think if the majority of the committee votes to impeach her, I imagine that the ANC in the National Assembly will vote that way as well.
Mr. Steenhuisen, let me bring you back to the debate. When the DA decided to go this route, you knew of some of the difficulties that you would have to encounter. The fact that the Rules Committee has to basically codify how you go about it. Take us through that process. I was hoping to be joined by the Secretary of the National Assembly, who had confirmed an interview with us. So I just want to get from you, take us from the Rules Committee and then how the process works and whether the committee has to be at one on the matter before the motion can be put before the House.
Well, what we're proposing, Karima, is that because it should not be easy to remove a public protector, we must remember that the rules we're making must outlast the current incumbent. And what you don't want is a simple process to be able to remove a public protector. If that had been the case, I've no doubt the Zuma administration would have moved very quickly to remove Mrs. Madonsela from office. So what we are proposing is an independent panel that would assess whether there's a prima facie case for one of the grounds for removal to be met. If it passes that muster after a motion in the National Assembly, then that will be referred to a Section 194 committee in Parliament, and that committee would then assess the evidence, would give Mrs. Mkhwebane a hearing, and would then weigh up whether there is a case to be taken to the House, and that would then serve before the National Assembly. The truth of the matter, and I think Mr. Lewis and you are absolutely correct, is that, yes, we can tick all the boxes in terms of the process. But what this is going to come down to, like so many other contested areas, from state-owned entities to the Reserve Bank to prescribed assets, is a factional battle that's waging in the ANC. There is no doubt that the Magashule Zumaite faction within the ANC that's implacably opposed to Mr. Ramaphosa and his reforms are very happy that Mrs. Mkhwebane is doing what she's doing. In fact, I would suggest that they are using her as a tool to undermine the president and his reform agenda and the allies. And so I think
before
it is
you
going
go
to come
into
down
some
to
of the
that battle.
politicking around the DA's issues and the divisions in the ANC, let me bring in the Secretary of the National Assembly, Masibulele Xaso. Good morning, sir. I want to get from you what the Speaker has directed the House to do, and what the timeframes, more importantly, are for this matter, because we've seen that Busisiwe Mkhwebane has threatened to actually take the Speaker to court.
Thank you. Good morning, Karima, and good morning to the panelists. The matter has now served before the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee has, of course, had preliminary discussions just to highlight some of the principles that must be taken into account. The matter has now been referred to the subcommittee on the review of rules. Of course, the Honourable Steenhuisen had made certain proposals. Those proposals have been referred to that subcommittee. A discussion document from the technical team has also been referred, and principles that were generated during the Rules Committee meeting. Now, the subcommittee will be meeting this coming Friday. It is a multi-party structure to discuss the issues. We do not know how long it's going to take, but the Speaker has asked that this matter be prioritized. So I expect that the subcommittee would have 1 or 2 meetings on the issue, or even 3, and come back to the Rules Committee. I think the intention, even though there's no specific time frame, the intention is that by the time, if all goes according to plan, by the time Parliament rises for the December recess, there should be a set of rules in place. But as I say, that will depend on what obtains in the subcommittee and in the Rules Committee.
Now, one of the problems with Parliament is, of course, the backlog. I mean, if one looks at the Ethics Committee, for example, you haven't even dealt with issues from the 5th administration, and we're already in the 6th administration. And a lot of times these committees can't function because people don't pitch and they don't curate. Like, for example, in the Ethics Committee, when the issue of Mr. Shivambu had to be dealt with, Mr. Julius Malema simply didn't pitch, and the committee meeting couldn't curate. How are you going to make sure that delaying tactics are not going to be employed by the parties who have a vested interest that this matter drags out as long as possible, that they don't play the games that political parties often play when they're not in favor of a particular discussion or topic coming onto the agenda of the National Assembly? What is the guidelines coming from the Speaker's office?
Well, up to now, really, when it comes to the Rules Committee, we have not had those kind of experiences. And we don't expect that we will. I mean, the Rules Committee has always prioritized matters before it. And the sense that we got from the last Rules Committee, at least, is that all the members, or at least most of the members, are committed to finalizing this process without delay. And therefore, when it comes to the Rules Committee, I must emphasize that experience has not been there. and we don't think it will be. The Rules Committee plays a crucial role in the running of business of Parliament. It is there to set a policy on core business, to design the rules, and I think all the parties recognize that this matter is important. Because remember, this is not just about the public protector. It's about all the institutions supporting democracy. Yes. So these rules are applicable to those institutions. And really, I don't think that there would be any such delays in this regard.
Now, what are you doing in preparation for a possible litigation from the current public protector? She has certainly gone on the record saying that she was appointed by God and only God can remove her from her office. Have you received any correspondence from her lawyers or her legal team or even her office on how this matter must be dealt with? Because we know that she had withdrawn her application at the Constitutional Court and left the matter to Parliament. But she was quite bolshy when she initially came out guns blazing against the Speaker. Give us an idea of what kind of correspondence has been going back and forth between yourselves and the public protector.
Well, on this issue, I mean, the Speaker received a letter about two months ago, or a month ago, I can't remember now, and the Speaker responded to the issue. And basically what the Speaker was explaining was that Parliament is within its powers to do what the Constitution has empowered it to do, which in this instance is that if there is a call for the fitness of the office bearer to be considered, the Speaker is obliged to activate that process. And that's really what the Speaker said. Beyond that, we have not received any correspondence. We have not received any court papers. And we can't speculate. We do not know if we will. If we do get to that point, the Speaker will seek legal advice and be guided in terms of how to respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Now, beyond seeking legal advice, obviously the institutions like Chapter 9 institutions are themselves creatures of the Constitution. So surely the public protector's specific issue relating to her as an individual and also to her office is something that will be guided by the Constitution. Is the Speaker going to be guided by the Constitution? Because often when people say they're seeking legal advice, we've seen in previous instances Parliament getting a slap on the wrist from the Apex Court on neglecting their responsibilities. What assurances can you give the public that the National Assembly will act in accordance with the Constitution?
Of course, the office of the Speaker itself is a creature of the Constitution, and Speaker will act in terms of the Constitution. This process, the removal of an office bearer in one of those institutions, is authorized by the Constitution, Section 194. And the procedure that the Rules Committee is busy with is, in fact, in terms of Section 194 of the Constitution, which lays out the grounds for the removal of those office bearers, which is misconduct, incompetence or incapacity. And the rules that are being drafted now have to comply with that. And therefore I can assure the public that anything that the Speaker does in this regard, anything that Parliament does, or the NA at least, National Assembly does, including its structures, has to be guided by those constitutional provisions, including what it has put in place in terms of its own rules.
Okay, we're running out of time. Mr. Lewis, I'm coming back to you for your final comment before I go to Mr. Steenhuisen. Do you have confidence in the parliamentary process, particularly given the fact that Parliament isn't always the poster girl for consistency or speed when it comes to matters that needs to be dealt with? As I said, there's a number of issues from the fifth administration that simply hasn't been dealt with yet.
You know, for some reason that would be probably difficult to explain rationally, my hunch is that Parliament is going to act with integrity and within the precepts of the Constitution on this issue. Like I say, you're dealing here with one of the most compromised individuals in the in the country. I don't envisage that in the end she will have the political support that she requires. So my sense is, and in all fairness, the Speaker has been, pretty straight down the line on this issue. The chair of the Portfolio Committee has been. So I am confident. I mean, I think that what we've got to start looking at very soon, though, is the appointment process. Appointment processes governing all of these kind of appointments. The Chapter 9 institutions, law enforcement bodies, the head of state-owned, the chair of state-owned enterprise boards, these have all got to be subject to a process that does not produce, frankly, incumbents, candidates like Busisiwe Mkhwebane.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Steenhuisen, I'm going to give you the final word, but it will be remiss of me to, of course, let you go without referring to two issues that put the DA into the news headlines this morning. The one is in the City Press. It's called The Curious Case of Musi Maimani's House. Now, the DA leader declares a 4 million rand property as his own, but the deeds office records say it is owned by a shelf company. What exactly does the DA know about who owns this house and why this house is not in the name of the DA leader? What is the party's official response to the story in the City Press this morning?
Well, Karima, it's not my job to give the official response to the party, but certainly as the Chief Whip of the caucus in the National Assembly, I can say very clearly here what Mr. Maimane is guilty of is an over-declaration. Rented properties are not required to be declared in the declaration of interests, but in any event, the original, well, the apparent alleged owner of the property is listed under Mr. Maimane's benefits. So I think what you've got here is a case of over-declaration rather than under-declaration. But obviously the matters will be clarified in the weeks ahead. But certainly at first flush, it appears that Mr. Maimane is guilty of nothing more than an over-declaration of a rental property which was not required to be declared, and has declared the owner of the property as someone providing a benefit to him.
Now,
so,
you always say that we must raise the bar, Mr. Steenhuisen, whether or not he's required to declare. He's living in a house and there's supposed to be a rental agreement. Do you know how much rent he pays and why he's not living in the parliamentary precinct as everybody else who serves in Parliament does and who are members of Parliament? Why is he living in this house? And this is tied to the fact that, the DA has made a meal of the CR17 campaign funding. But up till this day, Mr. Maimane has still to tell us who funded his campaign against Wilmot James when he ran for the leadership of the DA. So is this a benefactor of Mr. Maimane? Is this someone that provides him with financial support when he's waging battles inside the DA for leadership?
Firstly, let me just clarify, not all members of Parliament live in the parliamentary villages. In fact, very few of the party leaders stay in the party villages. Mr. Buthelezi, Mr. Malema and various other members of Parliament, Mr. Shivambu, don't stay in any of the parliamentary villages.
It still doesn't make it right, does it?
They all stay in accommodation off the precinct. Well, I'm saying to you that if someone's got a rental agreement with somebody, it's not required to be declared in terms of the declaration. What is required to be declared is any benefits received. And in this instance, Mr. Wessel Jacobs is listed, and the benefit that he's provided to Mr. Maimane is listed in the declaration of interest. This is in stark contrast to the absence of declaration by a number of people who were on the payroll of BOSASA, including Mr. Vincent Smith and various other ANC MPs who still serve in the National Assembly.
So answered like a true politician, Mr. Steenhuisen. I'm well aware of the behaviour of other politicians. We're not discussing them. We're discussing the leader of the DA. But let's just finally
Ms.
wrap
Brown,
up
I'm
the question.
saying to you that Mr. Maimane is guilty here of an over-declaration, which is certainly raising the bar, as you said in your initial comments.
Yes.
A stark contrast to anything else that we've seen before.
Another quick news question. There's a lot of talk that Mr. Athol Trollop is going to succeed Mr. James Self as the leader of, the Federal Council, and is going to head up that. What is your comment? And most importantly, does Mr. Trollop enjoy your support for that position?
Let me say that the nomination process has not opened. It appears that there's some speculation about who the candidates are. And obviously, we prefer to wait as a democratic party to give everybody an opportunity to stand for any position in the party. And I think it would be fair only to wait until all the candidates are known before pledging support to any particular candidate.
So you haven't thrown your weight behind Mr. Trollop?
Well, I would like to see who has put their name forward into the ring once that nomination process opens, and obviously we'll then make a decision about who I think would be best placed to lead that particular institution in the party. I think it would be premature for me now, prior to the nomination process, to throw my weight behind any particular candidate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steenhuisen from the DA, the Chief Whip there. Also, we were joined by the Secretary of the National Assembly, Mr. Kaba, and then, of course, also the Head of Corruption Watch, Mr. Dave Lewis. When we return, we take a look at the impact of violence on the psyche of Cape Flats communities and the healing power of solidarity. This is The Fix. Please stay with us.